Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on AP automation and what you can do in Microsoft Dynamics GP and Sage Intacct. I'm Sarah Novak, a marketing manager at LBMC Technology Solutions. Just a few housekeeping items first before we get started. All phone lines have been muted to eliminate any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know using the chat panel. And we'll be taking questions throughout today's webinar, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. You can submit your questions via the questions panel in WebEx, and we will also be recording this session and sending that out in a few days' time. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Dave Derry. Dave serves as our Microsoft Dynamics GP consultant and has over 10 years of experience in Dynamics GP. Thanks again for joining us, and Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
So today we'll be looking at 3 different functions in GP that you may not be using today or perhaps don't even know they existed prior. So today we'll be looking at workflow that allows you to build in some automation into your batching and approval processes. Again, today we're focusing on accounts payables, but I will show you a slide at the end that shows all the areas that workflow actually does touch in GP and can be used. We'll also be discussing EFT and how you can set up the system and vendors to be able to generate EFT files that you could submit to your bank. And then lastly, we'll talk about SafePay so that you can submit those payment distributions to the bank to help eliminate any fraud transactions from occurring. So jumping right in, as we get into workflow here, what I'm going to be stepping through just in the slide presentation is a 2-step approval. So the item that has AP approval 2, I actually have 2 steps. One is a task that requires the first person basically to approve the transaction, and the second would be the actual approver. Here, as the invoice is actually keyed in and the voucher is created, as you'll notice in the AP screen, once workflow is enabled, workflow sections turn on, so there's a band across the top that says whether the document has been submitted or what step in the workflow it is, and then also the actual workflow menu that allows you to submit or view the history on this item once it actually has been saved and submitted. Here I wanted to show that along with the workflow you can enable doc attach, and we'll show this in a second here, but we actually have one document that was assigned to the vendor, and then the second, which is actually the invoice. So what happens throughout the course of the workflow is these documents will attach to the workflow emails and then flow to the task approver and then the final approver in our example, so they can actually see those documents right through their email without having to go through GP to do anything else. Once the document is keyed in, the voucher, and you hit submit, basically it's going to give you a pop-up with a workflow action. So here you can add any additional comments that if you have any notes to the approver that you just want to pass along, you can attach those. And then finally, once you hit submit, that's going to send the notification to the layers of the workflow. So in this case, the first person would be the task approver. And so what you can see here is that in the bottom portion of the screenshot, the person receives an email with those 2 documents attached. The terms came from the vendor setup. The associated insurance PDF was actually the invoice. So in this case, the doc attach flows, and you can see that the person receives an email basically stating, you have a task, please review. And you can do a couple options here. As you notice in the screenshot, I'm kind of hovering the voucher number. If you click that and you're in GP, it actually recalls the document in GP and allows them to go ahead and complete the steps there if you choose. So you can hit task complete, delegate, or recall, basically stopping the flow or approving it. You also, via the email, have the option just hit complete. So this is the example of if you actually in the email you go ahead and approve it, The user is going to get a pop-up. Again, you can add notes. Here it's just simply we state approved, and then you mark your task as complete. This is going to route back through GP, through the services, and then hit the next stage of the workflow. In this case, it's going to be a notification to the final approver. Now, the final approver will get an email very similar to the first, because again, we did a two-step. So in this case, they also get the documents. Those continue to flow. You can see the Word doc and the PDF attached. This person can also, similar function, they can drill back at the GP or they can approve it directly through the email. If you notice at the bottom of the email in the background, here you can still see the comments. So the comments pass from the original voucher, any layers of tasks that go through. So you could have any number of tasks depending on just your approval steps that are set up in here. And again, the person can simply leave a comment or not, and then finally hit approve. Here you can see back into GP that the voucher is actually flagged approved. So now your AP person can go through and actually post the transaction at this point, because up until this point it was only saved and batched, working through the workflow process, so it couldn't be posted until this step. And then you can also see here that the workflow history for all the documents that are submitted are tracked all the way through the steps. So you can see, again, the origination, the submission, and then final approval. So that way you have a full workflow cycle from start to finish and can track everyone and every step as it goes through. And then finally, I just wanted to point out all the steps of workflow that are actually available. As you can see, again, today for this demonstration, we're just kind of talking through a fairly simple workflow for AP, but workflow does exist in several areas. You can go into full-on purchasing if you're doing purchase orders, requisitions, vendor approvals, payroll, project, admin, several different functions. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about this and how you might be able to use that and leverage it in your own companies. Now with that, we're going to jump into EFT. And so the way that I look at EFT is that we can basically have EFT up and functioning in 4 steps. The 4 steps are we need to set up a file format for your bank. The bank will provide those specs for you. Assign that format to your checkbooks. Set up your vendors with their banking information that they'll provide. And then lastly, use it. You'll be able to create EFT payments and then generate the actual EFT file. So for this portion, I'm going to go ahead and exit out. We're actually going to go live through this so we can show you in GP what this looks like. So the first step was the EFT setup. We need to actually set up an EFT format. So under Financial in GP, we're going to go into Cards, and we're going to look at EFT file format. Now here I've created one. This is usually, I'm using an out-of-the-box format that GP provides. Most banks, if you reach out to your account rep at your institution, they'll provide you the layout or the schema for this. Most banks are going to follow one of typically 4 different schemas, usually with some mild changes. So out of the box gets you close, but it's never quite exact. Even though it's sort of a standard, it's not 100% standard. So here we've set up our default layout. Once you have that layout created, you just need to assign that into your checkbook. So here we're going to open up our checkbook, and I'm using our demo checkbook, which is Uptown. And here, if you just hit EFT Bank, here you'd enter a routing, account number, and then basically for our example today, we're just talking AP, so I'll go into AP options. Here we assign that format that we created just a minute ago, so I'm just assigning my EFT layout, and then I'm giving a location for GP to actually create the file to. So that allows me now to link my checkbook to the format. Step 3 is creating or appending my vendors so that I have their checkbook information tied to their vendor records. Now the EFT info for vendors actually lives under their address, and the reason is because a vendor could have multiple addresses, U.S., foreign, etc. So this can also be set up under any different multi-currency scenarios. Here we're going to hit EFT Bank, and as you can see, I've gone ahead and set up defaults with bank name, routing, account number. And for domestic, that's basically all you need. You don't really have to go beyond those few steps that I've shown here. With that, EFT is actually ready to use. So if we go in and do a bank transaction, if we go in and cut checks, I'm going to go through Edit Payment Batch. I'm going to add this batch. If you're going EFT, the one big change that you have to do is simply flag it as EFT. And again, if you're doing domestic files, that's going to come up as domestic anyway. Again, you do have multi-currency options if you need to address that. So we'll save that batch. And now that I've flagged this as an EFT, we can go into our auto. And this person we have info for, so I'm going to grab a couple documents. And otherwise, I'm just following a standard check run, if you will. So I'm going to hit process. And here I'll process. Now there's no actual printing of checks. I'm going to post that through. And then the very final step, once that posts, is to create the actual EFT file. So this is under transactions and generate EFT. My option is purchasing. We know our checkbook was Uptown. And now you'll see this batch that we just ran through. So I'm just going to grab that and hit generate. And it tells you here the location and the name of the file that was created. So if we go look at that location, here we have the file. And this is going to be laid out to that schema that we just did a moment ago. So it's basically going to have all the bank info, our vendor information, which was auto finance, the amount of the check, their banking info, so that we can send that ACH. At that point, GP's process is complete. Normally at this stage, you'd log into your bank website and would basically upload that file to the site. Now you'll need to work with your account rep at the bank just to make sure your bank and account is set up for that functionality. But that's as simple as it gets for EFT. So our last piece that we're going to talk about today was utilizing SafePay in GP. SafePay primarily exists under financial routines. So if we pull up routines, you'll see the entire SafePay selection exists right here, so it doesn't exist in any other modules. It's actually all under this menu. Similar to EFT, there's a step where you have to set up the file layout. Again, the bank will provide you that. They'll tell you what that file needs to look like. Attach that file setup to an account, your bank account, and then be able to upload. So this one's even a little quicker. There's really only 3 steps basically to it. So we're going to jump right in. First, we're going to go to the SafePay configurator. Now I've already set up a dummy one for Bank of America. And what you'll see here is in this layout, and this is actually one we did for a Bank of America customer we have, that these are the fields that the bank required. So we have account, record type, check number, amount, dates, the payee, and then a few filler fields just to accommodate their spacing. Some banks are much more robust, some are less. Again, unlike EFT, SafePay doesn't really follow a standard. What I've found is almost every institution is different. Very same information, but layouts are all over the place, so you'll definitely need to get that info from your bank. Once you have this layout created, again, you'll need to assign that to a checkbook. In here, you would just key in your upload ID. In this case, I created one just called BOA that will match what I created. Well, Uptown, because it's going to be our Uptown account with BOA. So I've assigned it the bank. I've assigned it the output that we just looked at. And then here I've hit add checkbook, and we just added the Uptown Trust checkbook. Lastly, we go ahead and, like EFT, we have to just submit a location that this file is going to get created to, and then we'll save. Now with that, SafePay is actually ready to be used. So again, we just have a layout, a checkbook assignment, and then finally the upload. So here, if we go into upload, and we'll pull up that Uptown setup that we did. And here, I'm in a future year because being my test company, but I grabbed from the end of March through my test date, which is April 12th. Once I hit load, it's going to list all the transactions that have cut. In this case, I've set it up to also include EFT. Again, depending on your banking institution, you may or may not include those. And then simply I would hit upload and proceed. And it's going to tell you the location that that file was created to. This is a step that kind of exists in GP. Unfortunately, we can't skip it. A lot of times your bank doesn't do this anymore. They don't necessarily give you a confirmation number. So you end up, you know, it's a value you have to plug in the GP, so you may end up just kind of plugging a dummy value there. If they give you a confirmation number, that's great. You can go ahead and add that in. And then finally, it does give you a printout if you want to look at that. And what's going to happen is it'll show you the listing of all the documents that it's sending to the file. And in the system, it's just flagging those as marked. So it won't try and pull those again if you come back and rerun this. So we can see here in my SafePay folder that we have a output that, again, this is per that Bank of America layout. Lastly, with SafePay, it does give you an option that if you need to go back and rerun, so you can actually go into a transactions history and recall any given run. So we can get out to, this is today's run. You just have kind of the VCR buttons, the forward and back. So we can actually take this, if you do need to recall it and be able to resend it, and then simply hit upload. And again, it would go through the exact same steps. It would recreate it, and then again require a confirmation number. And with that, that is SafePay.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Dave. Looking at the questions here, we did have a question in regards to EFT and can LBMC assist with loading the vendor data?
Absolutely. So if you're if you've already been using GP for a number of years and you're converting over, obviously you may have lots of vendors that you want to do this with, and what we can do is we can help load that into the database for you because there's no good import mechanism out of the box. So we can certainly help you with getting that loaded if you have a lot of data that you need to get in.
Okay, great. And the other one is in regards to workflow, can you delegate a workflow?
Absolutely. It's all based on the options that you have picked in the workflow when you set it up. So you have a few options like delegation or build-in delays or resend notifications based on time limits, for example. So if your approver hasn't responded for 2 days, it'll send them another notification. So those are all options that just exist in the workflow. It's all about how you want to utilize it and how you decide to set it up.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other questions. All right, well, thank you so much, Dave, for presenting on the AP automation tools that are available in Microsoft Dynamics GP. And now we're going
to... My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Now we're going to switch it over to Glen, and Glen is going to be presenting on the capabilities in Sage Intacct for AP automation. Glen is our manager of Sage Intacct sales and support. He's been with LBMC Technology for 14 years. and he has over 8 years of experience with Intacct. So with that, Glenn, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Thank you all for your time today. So we'll be talking a little bit about Intacct and Sage AP automation through Sage Intacct. Just a little bit of kind of what I plan to talk about today is we'll discuss Sage Intacct. Just to give a little background for those of you who are not familiar with Sage Intacct, it's not been around as long as some of the other ERP solutions. And then we're going to kind of answer some of these questions. Is your procurement process too cumbersome? What can we do about that? How to speed approvals in your AP process? Eliminate handwritten checks by adding digital check signatures. We'll talk about that. How to pay vendors more efficiently with electronic payments, and then how to communicate more effectively using Intacct Collaborate. So that's some of the areas that we will be talking about. So just to give a little bit of background for that, just to talk about Intacct itself, Sage Intacct. So Intacct is a cloud solution. It is a true cloud solution. So it is built for the cloud originally whenever it was constructed for that. It's what's called a multi-tenant solution. So what that means, it's a multi-tenant solution. It means you never have to worry about upgrades. You're always on the latest version of Intacct. They release quarterly updates. So every quarter, there's one coming out here, I think on May the 15th, with just new features that it will have. So it's always updating and changing, but you get those automatically as it updates. And so it's a very efficient type of rollout. So you're always in the latest version of the system. It's also one of the only cloud solutions, or the only accounting cloud solution that is endorsed by the AICPA. So that's a big endorsement to have for that, which means it is a trusted solution. And some of the kind of the key components of Intacct that we'll be talking about today is easy connections with your systems of choice. So it's a great base system. It has a very solid financial core, the GL, and within Intacct it's a very good and very easy to maintain type of system. And also just the way you're able to use that data in order to extract things for like reporting and dashboards. So we'll be just kind of, you'll see that as we go through some of those things, but that's just kind of some of the core areas of how Intacct was built. So for the first one, just so you know, we'll be talking today about more of the standard features within Intacct, but for those of you who may be looking at other AP automation tools like Bill.com, Exchange, MineralTree, those different ones are out there, and there's many more. This Intacct was built with an API, a flexible API, which means if you choose to use one of these systems for more of your AP automation, that information will automatically come into within Intacct. These that I have listed here, and there's more on Intacct's marketplace, they have integrations built with Intacct. So whether you pay through one of these vendors or you pay through Intacct, everything stays, up to date within the system. So they have very good integrations between those. And a lot of our customers do use some different types of integrations with their Sage Intacct system. But it can stand alone by itself for AP and purchasing, and that's what we'll be discussing today as well. As I mentioned, also within Intacct, since you have a strong GL, you're able to have kind of a multi-entity. I'll be talking about that just a little bit. Of course, you can do multi-currency and global consolidation, those type of things, but it's meant to easily enforce and help you with consolidations within your systems if you have multiple companies. And then also just visibility as well. So within Intacct, you're able to get that information out. You're able to put it on dashboards or on reports. You can drill down into that information as well. So just being able to see information, extract information, having a strong core is what is kind of at the heart of Intacct for that. Now, even though Intact's been around for a long time, a lot of people have questions still occasionally on a cloud solution, even though it's a lot more commonplace now than it used to be just a couple of years ago. So to address that, Intacct puts just on their website. If you go to Intacct's website under the company, if you go to company and then you click down here where it says trust on the trust area, it will take you to a page where you can see all the system statuses, system security for failover and fail-safes, all those type of things, privacy. All the information is right here on the website. They don't try to hide that information and make it readily available to you so that you're able to see that information and keep up with it, especially for your IT folks who want to make sure that it's a secure system and it's very, very secure. All right, I'm going to switch views here just to show a view of Sage Intacct. Okay. Now you should be seeing my Sage Intacct system, and I have it pulled up here right now just to a dashboard, which is a very common thing. A lot of places where people start whenever they're viewing I'm working with Sage Intacct. And so you can see this is a controller dashboard. I just have a few things on here. They may be doing expenses approvals or bill approvals or those type of things. You can put a lot of that on your dashboard. Similarly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but if you're maybe like a CFO, you may have access to information on your dashboard that's both financial, but also maybe statistical type of information as well, non-financial, like rooms available, rooms sold in this example here. And all this information is available to individuals. This is a CFO, and they may not be a full user within the system. That allows them to see information, even to drill down. If I'll just get on here to this income statement and drill down under an expense, and I want to see what's making up these bills, I can actually drill down and see underneath that the actual bill for that, to see how that was coded into the system. So you have a lot of the access, even for people who are not entering the transactions, but you're able to have them access if they have the rights to drill down and see information within the system. And also within Intacct, where we're kind of talking about a little bit about navigation as we move around the system. As I mentioned, Intacct can be a multi-entity environment. If you have more than one company, different tax IDs, you don't have to log out and switch systems. You can do it all from here. As you can see up here, I have different companies set up. So these would all have different tax IDs, and you can work within just one of those companies, or you can have people's security go into just one of those companies so they don't see the information in the other companies as well. But from here at the top level, though, if I was here at the top level and I wanted to see information, I could easily drill down into information for the other entities just by changing that here. So it kind of gives you a top level view of information. Just a little bit of navigation as part of Intacct. Also, just a couple of things as well, just a general ledger. Within Intacct, it's able to be a lot more simplified. You can have a lot reduced number of GL accounts because it uses what's called dimensions. So you don't have to have a large different section of accounts within Intacct. You can keep it a lot more simplified. Within the system, you can have sub-accounts if you want. You don't have to. I just have some here for do to, do from, for handling inter-entity transactions, which it does automatically. But you're able to do that, and the way that you're able to do that is with using the different dimensions within Intacct. And I'll kind of give you an example of that here just by looking at an AP bill. So right here for this, I'll come back to this in a moment. But if we're entering an AP bill into the system, you can associate it to a GL account, and then we just select the different dimensions, what location is associated to a certain department. So you're able to really be flexible whenever you're entering information. Right here's some more dimensions. Intacct comes with 7 dimensions that you can use within the system, and you can always add more if you need to. But this information is very easily done, so that way you can slice and dice on any of this data as you're looking at financial information within the system. You can also set up allocations within Intacct. So if I had a bill here, say it's $5,000, I wanted to allocate that within the system, maybe a department square footage. I can just select that, and then the system would automatically, as you can see here, I have this set up, it will allocate that bill out over those. I have it set up for different departments, so it's going to do the allocation automatically for me based upon the allocation I have set up for that. All right, so what I want to talk about first is a little bit of navigation within Intacct, so we can see here. For this, about a little bit of navigation, I want to start with purchasing. As we talked about purchasing and the kind of the purchasing process within Intacct. I'm going to start here with an overview. As we talked about, is your procurement process too cumbersome? Now, one way it may be too cumbersome, it may not be within your system. It may be outside of your system for that, and so that everything's kind of handled on paper. Maybe you have a list, or you keep an Excel spreadsheet of different PO numbers, and you're trying to keep track of all of those things within a system. Also, maybe with approvals, you may have approvals that are outside, and you have to have those approvals done maybe manually within the system, and that causes a lot of delay as you kind of wait on those approvals and those things like that throughout the system. So just on the purchasing process itself here, as we see here, we kind of have a purchasing workflow, purchase requisitions, purchase orders. You can receive a shipment, you don't have to if you do have inventory. And of course, creating a vendor invoice whenever you're matching up your different documents for that. Now you can define what this workflow process is. We can also define how the approvals are going to go for this workflow process. So just to kind of give an example of that, I'm going to go here under my configuration for purchasing. I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit of ways to get to approvals. So I have purchasing approval selected. You can put some if you want to require a vendor or if you want to start a new approval if the transaction is modified. And of course, email notifications if you want them to go out as well. You can select that for those to go out of the system. But then right here is approval policies. And so we'll talk about setting up approval policies. You can also, if someone's out, you can enable delegation if you wish to. But right now, I'm just going to click here on Manage Approval Policies. I'll make this larger so we can see a little bit better. I just have one set up right now within the system. So this is another area that you can choose to make it a little bit more efficient for that, and also speed up the process of approval. Is sometimes people get a little bit too complicated on their approval policies. A little bit too, they may have too many steps within those policies. Within this right here, I'm identifying my transaction definition or the document that I'm using. And here's a purchase requisition. You can set up rule types. Now, I can have a lot of additional rule types down through here if I wish to, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, do I need those steps? Okay. So right now I have employee manager set up. So that means if the employee that's submitting this purchase requisition, it will go to their manager to do the approval. Now I could also have one that's set up to have it maybe look at the department. So the department that the employee is in, the department manager can do the approval. Or maybe it's based off of the location that they are in, and the locations can do the approval. Or we could also have it based off of value. And if it's within a certain value, then this needs these approvals. If it's within this other value range, it needs these other approvals. So you can have multiple steps within your process off for one document, on for an amount of your purchasing approval process. But one thing I usually try to challenge people is ask yourself, what's necessary? What can we get done in order to be most efficient through that process? If really just having the employee manager approval is enough, then I encourage you to try to make it more simplified for that, so you kind of know the process that's happening there as you go along for that process. As I also mentioned, you can have multiple different types of workflows. And in Intacct, that's called a transaction definition. So transaction definition is where we identify, maybe we have a purchase requisition, then maybe it gets converted to a purchase order. From a purchase order, it can either go to a vendor invoice or it can go to PO receiver if you're receiving inventory for that. If it goes to PO receiver, then it may go to vendor invoice. So we can define this process. We can give it new names and have multiple processes going. Each one of those different processes can have their own approval processes for each step. So you can have more complexity into your process or your workflow. So some things that you have to kind of think through, and ask yourself, do we really need all the steps of this? I have some organizations that purchase requisition, they go directly from purchase requisition directly to vendor invoice, which when you go to vendor invoice, it goes over to AP. That's really the only steps that they need for that. So they don't need all the steps within the process. But they may have another process where they do want purchase orders. So they may have, call these different things and have another set of of workflows down here that have a different approval process. Okay. So identifying, what makes the most efficient use of your processes within the system and how those processes are used and the approval processes as they go through that. To give a little bit of example of that, I'm going to log in here in this environment right here. I'm going to log in as what's called an employee user. An employee user with an Intacct is a very low-cost user. They have very limited capabilities. They can have a dashboard. As I mentioned, even a CFO could have a dashboard and really drill into information as long as you're not adding additional. So employee, what they can do is add purchase requisitions. So they're limited on what they can do, but they can go in here to purchase requisitions. So if they were to add a purchase requisition, I will add one for, let's just go through foods here. Through the purchasing process, instead of having to know the GL accounts, we set up items, and those items can be either inventory or not inventory items, but then we associate kind of on the back end for the vendor invoice how that hits the GL, so that the person who's doing this, who may be someone out in the field, who's able to enter purchase requisitions, they don't have to know the GL accounts associated here. They should know, what company and things that they are entering this for. And then maybe it's for a certain department, and they maybe are ordering a certain quantity of those within the system. Okay. So once they have those, then they submit those. And in our purchasing process, it's going to that employee's manager for that to be approved. Okay, so we can see out here it says it's been submitted, and this is still at the employee level. They can see that information there. I'm going to look up here, and this user is set up as that employee manager. Okay, so what they can do is they can go here to the approved transactions. They can see the transactions that are out there that are for their approval. Right here's our Cisco Foods. If they want to view that transaction, they can view that transaction. If there was an attachment, we didn't have an attachment here, but the employee user could just drag an attachment into this. They can view that attachment. They can see how it was coded out for this. They can either choose to individually approve these or decline them, or they can do it here from the view of all of those if they want to maybe approve all of them at once. You know, they can do that up here. Or if they decline them, they can put for either one. If they're doing them individually, they can say why they're declining it. If they decline it, they'll go back to the employee user and say, I'm declining this for this reason, so they can adjust it and resubmit it. Okay, but that can all be done within the system without having to do it outside of paperwork and things like that to the system. I'll go ahead and approve this one. As you can see here, I can add a comment if I choose to for this one, and I can say approve. Now, whenever the employee user has submitted this to be approved, the manager would have received an email from the system automatically that would have had a link to it saying that there's a purchasing transaction out there to be approved, and they could click on that link. It would take them to this page to do those approvals. Okay, so it's another automation feature that you can have is if you automatically email those managers to let them know there's something out there to be approved within the system. So from that point, once we have, as far as our workflow, we have our purchase requisitions. Our next step with that can be a purchase order. For that, if we look at our purchase orders, you can see here our purchase orders that may be in the system. That if we need to convert some of those purchase orders, we can convert those purchase orders. I'll just convert this one right here. We can either convert it to a PO receiver or to a vendor invoice, okay, within the system. If we select vendor invoice, this is usually where you're matching it up to a document from your vendor. So we put in that document number, which would then become our bill number within the AP side. And so we didn't have to change, if we don't have to change any information here, and if we've matched it up to our vendor invoice, then we can just go ahead and post this within the system. We'll have a contact in this one I chose here. But from that side, I'll go over to our accounts payable, and we'll be able to see that in our accounts payable bills over here. We can see what has been submitted. We can see if it came over from our vendor invoice area over here as well. Okay. Now, bills that can come over from our vendor invoice, as you can see here, we can tell these came over from purchasing. We can also enter bills directly into Intacct. When we enter bills directly into Intacct, we have a different process in that we do not use items. We are recoding it just directly to the GL accounts. For that, we've already shown allocations and how you can use allocations here. But for these that are entered into the system, these may have to be entered by what's called a business user within Intacct. But you can also speed up the process of that. Since we have an approval process on our purchasing, we've already had it approved. From our accounts payable process, whenever we enter a bill, we can also have an approval around just entering a bill. So when that bill is entered into the system, you can have a process set up for that so that it can email someone that can also be an employee user to do the approval of that bill. Okay. Then you go through the process of where you're paying bills. You're selecting what you're going to pay. And you can either pay them via check or via ACH. We'll look at that in just a moment. And then you can have another approval process before they're printed within the system. So this process right here, you can have this automated as well. Instead of having to collect bills, send those bills out to be approved manually within the system. Once the bill is entered, it can be sent out to be approved. And then the person, of course, will be notified that those have been approved and they're ready to be paid. But that can all be done within the system without having to do that outside of the system. That would definitely help with that. Now, as we talked about payments, approving payments, we have two approvals that can happen here. An approval when the bill is entered and approval whenever it's getting ready to be paid. This approval right here is another area that you can also do more automation around. Okay, a lot of times with this process, for this, you can have an approved payment, and then you can print the check. Sometimes this is people print out those, maybe an aging or something like that, identifying what they're going to pay. Someone has to, say they're going to approve those, and then maybe they have to also handwrite the checks or signature on the checks for that. Well, if your process allows, the person who does the approved payments, if that's the same person who usually signs the checks, if you use that as your approval, they've already seen it, they've agreed if it's going to be paid, you can add signatures to that so that the signatures can automatically print out on the checks. We do that through our cash management system whenever we're setting up our checking accounts. So as we go here and we're looking at checking accounts, I'll look here at the Chase account. So here I have my bank information set up, okay, within the system. Here under check printing, I'm deciding if I'm going to use pre-printed or blank check stock within the system. I can also upload a signature here. So I can upload a signature into the system, as you can see right here, and I can use that signature on checks, okay? So that signature would automatically come through and be signed on the checks. So you can do that with the bank account information. So the way that process works, for that, if I go back over here to accounts payable, I can go here to pay bills. When I'm selecting the pay bills, I can decide my payment method. As here you can see it's pay by check. I can also, if I want to pay by ACH or pay by other methods within here. Now, if you have an integration, so if we have an integration with maybe Bill.com or American Express type of integrations, where they have some features that are built into Intacct to allow you to pay what's called a check delivery service for those areas. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. You'll have more options here if you are integrated with some other third-party systems. You have more options here to be added here of how you can do the payments. Okay. So if we choose to do check payment, we'll select the bank we want to pay out of. Once we do that, we can select, I'll just choose date due for now. You can do a vendor range or a vendor due date period if you select to. Just for now, I'll just choose everything that we have out here at the moment for these. So as we look at this information, we can see our bank information out here. The set payment date, as we mentioned, will be our check date. As you select what you're going to pay out here for this, then as you can see, it will show you over here the amount that you've selected for that. Now, at this point within the system, you can what's called add to outbox. In other words, you can kind of put the things you're going to pay if you're not going to pay right then. Maybe it's Tuesday, you're not going to pay to Friday, but you want to go ahead and work on some of these. You can add things to outbox right here. Okay. If you have discounts to apply, you'll see the discounts are right here within the system. You can just click here on Line Details. It will show you the number of the credit that you have, and you can select how you're going to apply that credit. But once you've selected what you're going to pay within the system, you're going to click on Pay Now for that. And that will, if you have an approval process for that, here again, the system can automatically email the person who does that approval. You'll go out there and they'll be able to see what's out there to be approved. Here again, they can choose to approve or decline that. And this is to approve the payment. So this is to approve if it's going to be done by check or if it's going to be done by ACH. We're approving that payment right here. So I can select to approve that. I can add a comment if they wish to. And then from that point, they can go over here and they can print the checks out. We're looking at the checks for that bank account, and they can select to print those checks within the system. So the process there, we can kind of speed that up by using some of that approvals for that. If I was to print this check out, actually, you can have them print this one. And this will show on here our check signature, okay? So this one, of course, has word on. This would show our check signature because we have that automated on there. So we don't have to wait to get someone to sign the checks. If they've already done the approval, then we can automate that process. It's putting the checks, the signature on the checks. That helps to speed up that check process there. Now, whenever we are setting up our vendors within the system, and just select one here. There's a couple of things where we can help to automate a little bit of this process as well. So if we have our vendors set up, if we've started capturing our email addresses within the system, then when we go over here to payment information, we can have this option right here as a send automatic payment notification. So if we have an email address, we can select this. But whenever we're doing that process, to pay bills within the system, and then we have the checks or the ACH done for that process. The system will automatically, once those approvals are done, will automatically send this vendor based off of that email address that you have over here, can send them a payment notification saying this is what you're going to get paid on this date, whether it's by check or ACH. Then it kind of gives them what they're going to get paid for. So kind of a check stub type of information for what they're getting paid for. Now, if someone does have ACH, as you can see here, this has ACH, you can have their banking information. Now, entering this information can be controlled. So this is part of, if you have your AP policy set up, you want to make sure the same person, usually that cutting checks, is not the same person who has the ability to bank information. So you want to make sure you have separation of duties there, and that's Intacct has a very flexible process there for that to make sure that you have the same people can't see both of those things. Built within Intacct is also some automation features. Intacct check delivery service, if you maybe as far as volume and things like that, it does not make sense dollar-wise possibly for you to have someone who just prints out checks and folds the checks and puts them, matches up the invoice and puts them into the envelope and then puts a stamp on the envelope. If you think of that process there, you can automate more of that process, and you can use systems out there like AvidXchange or Bill.com, or this Intacct check delivery service, which actually goes to American Express, where they do that part for you. So that will be one of those options in our pay bills area. You can choose Intacct check delivery service for that, and then those checks would automatically go and be printed, mailed, and sent out. It has your check number information, your bank information, so if one got voided or for some reason it would come back to you for that. If you avoid that check, you avoid it at the bank just like you regularly do, because it is your check information or your bank information on those, but they're handling that process for you. Now within Intacct, you can also do ACH. It natively has ACH within the system. And we see that under our cash management area where we can generate that ACH file within the system, and then we can send that file to the bank for cash management purposes. You can also use American Express as an ACH payment services, so it is literally more push a button. So you set it up ahead of time, and instead of having to upload the file to your bank, they will handle that for you and process those transactions. These usually have a service charge based off of them, whereas of course if you're doing it through Intacct it does not, but based off of volume. And then you can also use American Express card payment services. So if you have an American Express card and you wish to pay some of your bills via that American Express card, you want to get points and those type of things for those payments, you can use this process as well. It will add another feature to that, the different options in the pay bills, just like the others. And then whenever you select this process, then it will actually send an email to those vendors with a kind of not a masked credit card number. It's not going to be your number. It'll be one for them to process for like 20 days. They can use that number before it becomes invalid and allow them to process that payment. Okay, all this stuff reconciles back into Intacct, back into your cash account, those type of things, so you don't have to worry about doing the reconciliation. Everything should come back into Intacct and those other systems. So that's some of the ways that you can use more electronic type of payments for those. And as I mentioned, also since there's tight integrations between Bill.com, AvidXchange, one of these others, Tree and others, that you can also use those services and do payments through those, and they also come back into Intacct as well to show payment within the system. Another feature that often helps within Intacct and also helps as you're looking at information is if you are maybe viewing information, and I have a bill here. I'll just choose a bill and choose this bill here. You maybe have a question on this. I'm not sure exactly what this bill is for. Well, this section down here is called Intacct Collaborate. It allows you to add notes or to email someone. If you think about kind of like the social media inside of your Intacct environment for other Intacct users. So I can go in here and I can say, in this process, I can look up someone within the system and I can send a message and say, what was this for? And I can share that with them. They'll be notified automatically within the system that there was a collaboration message out there for them, okay? And they'll be able to see that. They can click on that link. It will show up here. It'll show a little number at the top right up here to show that they have something in their collaboration link. And they can look at that information. It also stays here on this record, and it's permanently stays here on this record. That allows it within the system to, for audit purposes, you can go back and that information will stay here. And you can have this collaboration feature. Of course, I have it here on bills or vendors or pretty much any reports and other things within the system. It's a very handy feature to have within Intacct. If I go to the collaboration area, I'll be able to kind of look at collaboration, see, if I had a lot of different things within the system, I can see, maybe there's different things that I want to look at. If I have a certain bill here, I can click on that. It will take me to that bill so I can see the information for that bill and see any communications and things that happen for that as well. So collaboration, the Collaborate tool, and it provides a lot of different features that you can kind of use for intercompany, so you can kind of see those a lot more quickly and get those questions answered and kind of get the process moving instead of having to wait on replies by sending in papers and those type of things within your organization. Okay, I think that's all that was planned on covering today, Sarah, for that, just covering some features within Intacct, kind of the native functionality.
Great, thank you, Glenn. We do have some questions. The first one that was submitted is, the question is, if you're a multi-entity company, can you set approvals at the child level and not top level? Depending on the company within the multi-entity org, we have different personnel approving.
If you have approval policies set, they're usually set at the top level. Now, whenever you have those policies set within the system, those will kind of go across, depending on how you set up that policy. It's based off the department level. Departments kind of go across the organization, so it depends on the level for that. Now, on your approval policies, if you have an approval policy, I'm going to go right here to approval policies. You can be a lot more intricate on your approval policies. If you have it set up, maybe you have based off of value approval, maybe by transaction departments, for example, on this, then you can set up what's called a rule set. A rule set allows you to set up by the, you can select the approver, and that approver can be at each location or department that you have in a multi-entity environment, and you can have that set so they can say this is the value that this person's approving. That allows you a lot more flexibility, especially if you have a lot of different maybe departments, a lot of different locations that you need to have those done. Then you might want to use what's called a rule set. Look at that feature in order to help do that. We have some large companies that have a lot of different dimensions, and they want to make sure that they have those approvals set up, so that's kind of what they use. They use a rule set to kind of divide those up within based off of the transaction department, which means it's going to look at each line of the transaction for that and kind of, look at that way. So there's ways to do it within there, but in general, you set your policies at the top level, but as you go down within the system, it may be how your employee users are set up. If you do employee manager, maybe your employees may be set up just within the department, so it just be, or just within the location, so just be within a certain entity. So you kind of have to look at the different levels of it and where those approvals need to happen. But there's different possibilities for that as well.
Okay, thank you. Question we have is, can purchase rec be set up to be done without item IDs?
No, the purchasing, just like the order entry, it has to use an item in order to do it. Now, you can be more generic in your items, like if you just want to have an item set up that's for like office supplies. In other words, it may be kind of mirroring basically what your GL accounts are, and that way you have it mapped to your GL accounts for that. So you can be more generic, and then of course whenever you put in your description for what you're purchasing, you can put in more detail for that. But that would kind of allow you to kind of identify, kind of based off the different GL accounts, kind of what you're entering for that. So you do have to use items for that, but you can use non-inventory items or purchase-only items and still direct those to the GL accounts. It just take a little bit more setup on the item side.
Okay. And then we have another question. Is there any capability of invoices being emailed directly into Intacct?
Not with the native functionality of Intacct at this time. I'm not sure if that's on the roadmap or not. With some of the other features, if you do integrate with like Bill.com or AvidXchange, some of those things that do have that capability, then those can come into Intacct. So through one of those you can, but natively within Intacct, that's not available at this time.
Okay. And last question we have here is, can an employee user approve AP bills, or do they have to be a business user?
That's a great question. For the AP bills, the AP bills have to be entered by a business user, but they can be approved by an employee user. You don't have quite as much configuration options whenever you do the approvals for the AP bills. Let me see if I have one down here that I can show you. Maybe AP bill approval policies. So you don't have as many. As you can see, you just have more of your value type of approval or your transaction where you can use a rule set for those, or otherwise you use an individual for that approval of the bills for that. So you have more of a limited selection of who can do that, but this is set up within the user permissions if they have AP bill approval for that, but it can be an employee user. You just don't have as wide a range as you do under purchasing for how you set up those approvals.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. I know we covered a lot of content today, and if you have any follow-up questions that maybe you think about later, please reach out to us, and we're glad to answer any questions that you have. We'll be sending out an email in a couple of days with the links to the recordings. In case there's something that you would like to see again. It'll also include a survey, and we'd love to get your feedback on this presentation and learn what topics you'd like to know more about. So thanks again for attending today's presentation, and we hope you have a great day.